Hi there, welcome back to today's podcast. In today's podcast, we got a fun one today. I'm joined by Sean, and we're going to discuss a little bit of resistance training. So, Sean, how are you doing today?
Good, thanks for having me back.
No problem, looking forward to this one. So basically, the name of the game for today's podcast, we're going to discuss the 6 foundational movements, and we're going to pick our top 2 exercises for that particular movement. And I don't know Sean's answers. He doesn't know my answers, so I'm assuming we're gonna have a lot of different ones, so we can have a little bit of debate at the same time. So the categories we have is push, so anything kind of like a chest press, any sort of pushing type of motion, a pull, any sort of like row or a chin up or a lat pull down, some in terms of that. A hinge, think like pushing hips back, like some sort of deadlift. We got a squat, speaks for itself. Single leg, so single leg means just one leg. It can be something like a split squat, we're still gonna count that as a single leg. And then we got carry as well, kind of carrying a weight as we walk back and forth. What are some of the factors you kind of put into picking some of your exercises?
Yeah, so I'd say the first one that I really considered was overall physique. I think, at least for myself personally, that's one of the main motivators for me to exercise. And I know for my clients, they come in because they want to transform their physique. So that was the main one. Also, my personal preference as well. So that definitely played a role. Degree of difficulty, I didn't want to choose ones that were a little too obscure and too difficult to do. Ease of setup, nothing that requires some crazy equipment, and just overall risk for injury. I know you probably put a higher emphasis on that than I did, but obviously that was still something that I put into consideration. So what were some of the things that you considered?
Definitely a lot of overlap for sure. Like you said, I kind of come from obviously a corrective background. I'm highly influenced by people like Eric Cressy, Shirley Sarman, and kind of people in that prehab, rehab type of field. So I'm definitely influenced heavily in that. Strength was a component for me. Like, is it a movement you can easily overload? Obviously muscle growth. Can you get good muscle growth from that particular movement? Like you said, kind of physique. And I like that you said degree of difficulty too. I didn't include any like Olympic lifts in there. Obviously, it's going to be pretty challenging for the general public to do. So degree of difficulty is definitely a factor. But like you said, injury prevention is obviously a big factor for me. And yeah, kind of combine all those factors to kind of pick my top 2 for that particular movements. You ready to get started?
Sure, let's do it.
All right, I'm gonna let Sean start off first. So what he's gonna do, what we're gonna do, I should say, he's gonna say the first 2 exercises and he's gonna explain them. I'll say my 2, and then we can have a little debate if we kind of disagree back and forth. So the first category, it's gonna be single leg. So what are your top 2 exercises if you had to pick for single leg training?
Sure, so single leg, and by the way, I'm gonna give a 2 to 5 second delay after each question that he asked, just because last time, for whatever reason, during the Spotify, or not Spotify, but the actual podcast section, we had overlapping and it just sounded like I was interrupting the whole time. So I don't want to do that again. For single leg, I had a feeling what you were going to say, so I didn't want to include that. This one is based off a lot of my personal preference, and that's the walking lunge. The walking lunge was the first one I chose, and the second one I chose was the single leg deadlift. So the reason I chose the walking lunge is, for me personally, I enjoy doing it more than a Bulgarian split squat, which I would find kind of similar exercises. I find for me personally, it hits my glutes harder than any exercise. I know that's anecdotal, and some people might feel it more on the quads. I like that I can kind of throw a barbell on my back and do the walking lunge from there. And it's just an exercise that I really enjoy. The negatives, I guess you could say, about the walking lunge is it's not suited for everyone. It is more of an advanced exercise because it does require that deceleration after each step, requires a certain amount of stability and balance, and it also requires you to have space. So logistically, it might not be the best single leg exercise for those reasons, but personally, just for my overall physique, my enjoyment, and the way I can set it up, the walking lunge is my favorite, probably lower body exercise that really targets my quads and the glutes. The second one I chose was the single leg deadlift. The single leg deadlift, not that it's necessarily a favorite of mine to do, I just think it's a really important exercise to do. I think a lot of people are tempted to grab a barbell, go super heavy, see what their 1 rep barbell max is, and they don't really realize that they already have, this is more up your alley, but they don't have a ton of imbalances. So they're driving off more with one leg, their hips are shifting to the side, and you can't really tell when you're doing that during a barbell deadlift. It's very subtle and it's very hard to look at and notice until you actually get injured. So I like to use the single leg deadlift as a prerequisite, not necessarily to prerequisite before deadlifting, but a prerequisite before deadlifting heavy, because it's going to test a bunch of things that your regular deadlift won't really be able to identify for you. So your balance, your stability, your mobility, and I like that you can use a bunch of different pieces of equipment for it. So I like to use a kettlebell, just offset, one hand. You can use dumbbells, you can use a barbell, you can use landmine, you can even go body weight. And the reason I like to do this is, like I said, it's a prerequisite before you want to go and deadlift heavy, because you'd be surprised how many people can deadlift heavy but can't do a single leg deadlift without any sort of equipment at all. I also like it as accessory work, so if I'm doing a lower body workout and I want to work the hamstrings, I want to work the glutes, but I don't feel like deadlifting too heavy, maybe I want a little bit of an easier neurological type of workout. I just find the single leg deadlift is an exercise that really translates well, and it identifies a lot of weaknesses and imbalances, and you're able to correct a lot of those weaknesses and imbalances. So those would be my two for single leg. Curious to hear yours.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you kind of pulled a page from my book there, kind of the injury prevention, the single leg deadlifts. I can definitely appreciate that. And we'll kind of get to why I didn't pick them, and you can kind of discuss why you didn't pick mine after. But we actually have two different ones right off the bat. So my first one is a Bulgarian split squat, and my second one is a reverse lunge. So the Bulgarian split squat, reason why I choose this one, I just love it for so many reasons. Number one, it's a fantastic way to hit the glutes, but you can also even bias it to more quads as well. The setup is pretty straightforward. As long as you have some decent coordination, it can really kind of help with the stability component, so that way you can really overload the lift pretty well. So that's why I kind of like the Bulgarian split squat in that sense. It also gives us good mobility on that back leg. So if we're super tight in our quad muscle, a muscle called the rectus femoris, we kind of get on that kickstand. It's a great way to get some mobility in that back rear leg, but at the same time really focusing on strength, stability, and coordination on that front leg. And I really like it. Any single leg trainer really is going to have this muscle kicking in, but the glute medius's job is basically to stabilize the hips, making sure it's not going to go back and forth. And in that Bulgarian split squat, same thing obviously as a walking lunge, the glute medius is really going to kick in to make sure we don't have that knee cave or the hips don't shift. And that's the reason why I put a Bulgarian split squat, because it's just a great way to overload, and you get some sort of stability component to it, but at the same time, you would need some coordination and some balance to it. And the second one I chose was a reverse lunge. The reason why I picked a reverse lunge over kind of like a forward lunge is because I think most people, as a general thumb, need to learn to sit back into their hips a bit more. And I think a lot of people are quad dominant, and their first motion in terms of whether it's like a squat or a lunge is the knee kind of shoots out forward first, and then the hip kind of falls. In the reverse lunge, we get a little more of a vertical tibia, or a shin bone, which can be very beneficial for our knee health. And it teaches the individual to really sit back in the hips, and once again, it's going to be a great way to really target the glutes. So there's no really right or wrong way. As you can kind of tell, I kind of bias a little more towards the glutes. Sean, of course, did with the single leg deadlift, but the walking lunge, still fantastic for the glutes, of course, gives you the deceleration component to it, but it could be a little more quad dominant, especially if you're kind of leading with the knee. So I'll kind of talk about why I didn't pick the single leg deadlift. Honestly, the walking lunge for me, that was my third, kind of like even 2A, 2B, so I was pretty close to pick that one. But did you want to discuss maybe why you didn't kind of pick the Bulgarian or the reverse lunge?
Yeah, so for the Bulgarians, one, I knew you were going to choose the Bulgarians, so I knew for a fact. Two, it just came down to personal preference. Personally, I like the Bulgarians and walking lunges equally. I think they accomplish similar things. I agree with everything you said. I think there probably are more, I don't want to say negatives, but more obstacles when it comes to the walking lunge. So the Bulgarian might be a better introduction exercise. But just for me personally, as close as they were when I kind of weighed everything, it just came down to my personal preference. I happen to prefer the walking lunge over the Bulgarian split squat. I really don't have any negative to say about the split squats. I know for a lot of people, it can be a very difficult and challenging exercise to do. It can be often referred to as the most painful exercise to do because of just how difficult and how much it burns those legs and gets the heart rate up. And I just enjoy the walking lunge better. And reverse lunge, I have nothing against either. Just, I guess I was trying to focus on more hamstring, where you were focused on more taking pressure off of the knee during the lunge, which I think is a super important thing to note. So if you're doing a walking lunge and your knees hurt, easiest way to modify that is to do either the Bulgarian split squat or the reverse lunge, which is going to take a lot of pressure off the knees and load up the glutes, but can't go wrong with either one of those, so I have no issues with your choices.
Yeah, I think all 4 choices are great, and the walking lunge, like I said, that's kind of was my 2B. I was so close to put it in, so I don't really have anything negative to say about the walking lunge. I love that exercise. It just kind of came down to knee health for myself. The single leg deadlift, the reason why I didn't include it, you made some absolutely fantastic points on how it's so good for kind of the proprioception, so where your body's in space, and it's good for glute, ankle, all that sort of stuff in terms of stability. The only reason why I didn't choose the single leg deadlift is because I find it's difficult to really load that pattern in terms of an overload. So most people's limiting factor in the single leg deadlift is going to be stability, and they're not going to be able to really lift that much weight because of the stability component. But for all the reasons you mentioned, if I'm talking just pure, kind of full body, single leg, coordination, stability, even a little bit of strength, it is definitely a fantastic exercise to do. And it's an exercise I do, I know you do every single time. Again, these are all just great exercises. We're just picking our top 2, and that's where we're just having a little bit of fun with it right now. Any more to add to that, or?
No, I think that's good. And I think like Rich said, all of the exercises we're choosing are exercises that we actually do as well. So It's not like we're just picking exercises for the sake of it. I think we're done with the first one. We're going to move on to the second one here, which is the hinge. So we're going to get Rich to go first here. What are the 2 hinge exercises that you chose?
Okay, so the 2 hinge exercises I chose were Romanian deadlift, and on the second one, you're going to disagree with this one, is a barbell hip thrust. So I'll start with Romanian deadlift first. Romanian deadlift, obviously deadlift in general is a fantastic movement pattern to really master. And I think a lot of people think of the deadlift as a strength exercise, which it is, and it's a great exercise. You can actually add strength to it, speaking of the Romanian deadlift, but it's more importantly a movement that I think a lot of people don't know how to do. And if we don't know how to really hinge back our hips properly, that's just going to cause problems down the road, because if we get in sort of, so we got to pick something off the ground, generally speaking, our back's going to bend a lot more than our hips, and that can potentially cause a lot of issues. So the Romanian deadlift, great in terms of knee and lower back health, but it's also a fantastic way to build our hamstrings, our glutes, our grip strength. And like I said, it just really teaches the individual to kind of learn that hip hinge pattern. And it's also great for core stability as well, as we get so many muscles around the spine that really have to kick in when we are doing a Romanian deadlift. The second one I chose, and there's a disadvantage of Romanian deadlift compared to a conventional. Maybe you can't lift as much weight opposed to pulling something to the ground, but for the most part, there really isn't that much of a negative for Romanian deadlift. Unless you do not know how to hip hinge, then it can potentially be problematic. The barbell hip thrust is the second one I chose, and this one's going to be a little bit controversial. The reason why I chose the barbell hip thrust is because it strengthens the glutes in its short range. So it's a bit of a meathead answer I'm going to give you right here. But we have something called strength curves. There's an ascending and descending, and there's something else as well, but don't worry about that. An ascending strength curve would be an example as a deadlift. So we kind of come up to the top part of the deadlift. There's really not that much load on the glutes, right? Just think about it. We're in that bottom range, that bottom mid-range. The hardest part of a deadlift is going to be in that bottom to mid-range, and we pull up that bar. It's going to be pretty easy. Maybe for grip strength it's tough, but there's no real load on the hamstrings and the glutes. The barbell hip thrust is a descending strength curve, meaning it gets harder at the top part of the lift. So obviously when we're at the bottom of the barbell hip thrust, it's pretty easy. When we thrust up to the top, it's going to be a lot more challenging to do, and it really loads the glutes in that short range of motion. That's the reason why I really like it. I like it as well because a lot of times in lower body workouts, let's say if we can't get a barbell around our back and we're always just holding dumbbells, the barbell hip thrust would be a great way to kind of load and take off some load on the forearm muscles. We don't have to grab the bar, it's just stabilized right there. And if we're super kind of pulled down and really lack dominance, this would be a fantastic exercise to do. If there is one big disadvantage of the barbell hip thrust, I will say it's a very awkward exercise to do and to set up. But that's kind of my 2. What did you pick for hinge?
So for hinge, I agree 100% with Romanian deadlift. I don't want to repeat everything you said because I agree 100%. I think it's an exercise that everyone should learn how to master. At least from my experience, I find a lot of men in particular really struggle to hip hinge properly And they often come in with back pain and knee pain because one, they don't know how to hinge and keep their back straight, and two, they'll just defer into a squat pattern. So they'll just squat up and down, all knee flexion, no hip flexion, and then eventually their knees start to hurt because there's such a discrepancy. And like Rich mentioned earlier, most people are super quad dominant. So if you want to really take some pressure off the quads and load up the hamstrings and glutes a little bit, it's going to really help if you're able to hinge correctly. And I think the barbell and dumbbell Romanian deadlift is probably the king of all hinge exercises for the reasons that he stated. So I don't want to get into too much there. I will say the one potential negative, if you're not working with a coach, it can seem like you might be doing everything properly with the deadlift, but there are so many things that go into it. So you might be rounding that lower back without realizing. Your shoulders might be caving in. You might be bending too much from the knees. It's a pretty complex movement that looks really simple. So it's not the easiest exercise to do, but it's a very, very important exercise and pattern to learn. So I agree 100% with that one. The second one I chose is kettlebell swing. You could use a dumbbell, but I just find the kettlebell is perfectly suited for the swing. And the kettlebell swing is basically an explosive deadlift. It is working all of those posterior chain muscles, the hamstrings, the glutes, the back, and we're able to do so explosively. So really good for getting that heart rate up. It's really good for working a ton of different muscles, just like the deadlift does. And it has really good implications when it comes to athletic performance. So if you're an athlete, if you're trying to get faster, stronger, more explosive, the kettlebell swing is one of those exercises that you can do with a really heavy weight because you're not using your arms. It's going to teach you how to use your hips and how to effectively drive through and create as much power as you can. I find this one does a really good job of, one, just becoming more explosive. Two, I find it does help, not as efficient as the barbell hip thrust, but it does help with hypertrophy when it comes to the glutes. And three, it's almost like a cardio exercise as well. It's going to really get that heart rate up. So you do get the best of both worlds. The negatives would be very similar to the Romanian deadlift, just amplified. Meaning if you're not able to do a deadlift correctly, you definitely should not be doing a swing because it's a lot more explosive. And if you're not able to control that, if you're not able to hip hinge properly, the risks associated with the deadlift are just compounded when it comes to the kettlebell swing. So as much as I love the kettlebell swing, make sure you're able to hip hinge correctly. So those would be my two choices for the hinge.
Okay, so yeah, the reason why you didn't pick the swing, and I'm actually curious to see why you didn't pick the barbell hip thrust, is interesting. This is a swing for me. Again, I'm kind of thinking about overload. Again, some movements maybe we can do if we're really strong, 100, 110, 120 pounds. And the force production of it, so we kind of get the top part of the lift. There's not going to be too much tension on the glutes, but it is a fantastic exercise. I do kettlebell swings all the time. Great for power, great for conditioning. Like Sean said, still going to get the glutes and hamstrings involved. But again, it kind of comes down to me in terms of just like a little bit tough to overload the movements to kind of get maximum glute and hamstring benefits. I'm curious to hear your opinion on the barbell hip thrust. You know I'm a huge fan of it. You're so-so on that. Go away. Feel free to rip it if you want.
Yeah, no, I definitely don't want to rip on it. I think if you look at like the research and the EMGs and everything, like, it's a great exercise objectively, on paper, fantastic. I just think there's some exercises, and just in general with everything, where it looks good on paper, but for some people it just doesn't translate well. And for me personally, I just don't enjoy doing it. I find it's really uncomfortable, it's really awkward, and the amount of effort that I'm exerting doesn't really get me the type of production or feeling that I want to get out of that exercise. I think the setup takes a long time. I think for some people it's fantastic. So I don't want to rip on the hip thrust at all. I think some people probably get the most glute activation of that exercise, and I'm sure you probably have the studies to back that up. But just for me personally, I find it's uncomfortable. I know a lot of clients say the exact same thing. It's really uncomfortable exercise. It doesn't feel good. It's awkward. And the setup has to be perfect, because if you mess up the setup, or even if you mess up the execution, it's very easy from going to glute dominant exercise to hamstrings, quads, even calves. There's a lot of room for error for it. And just personally, when it comes down to the amount of effort that I'm giving, because it does take a lot of energy to perform this exercise, I find I can get more out of my glutes from a Bulgarian split squat, a reverse lunge, a walking lunge, even an RDL, Romanian deadlift. So it's not that I dislike it, it's just I personally think it's one of the more overrated exercises because of how much people talk about how great it is. So that's probably why I wouldn't include it on my list.
No, those are all valid points, and honestly, I really can't disagree with too much of that. Like you said, there's a lot of personal preference. Definitely a lot of people definitely find it awkward. Kind of like a love-hate one for sure, I find. Let's move on. Next one we're going to talk about is the squats. So I'll let Sean kind of lead the way here. What are your 2 exercises you picked for the squat?
So squat, I chose number 1, the goblet squat. And number 2 isn't necessarily a type of squat, but a way of doing the squat, and that's a heel elevated squat. And the reason I chose the goblet squat, I just think it's a fantastic way to introduce lifting heavy weights into a squat without overloading to the point where you're grabbing a barbell and throwing it on your back. I think people see the barbell squat and just assume that it's the best way to squat. But I think the goblet squat is a great way to at least develop the good habits and the good technique. It's going to engage a lot more muscles than a barbell squat, which is also kind of the negative. You're not going to be able to overload it the same way you would with a barbell squat. But you're really working your core, your mid-back, your upper back, and by keeping those elbows in and the dumbbell under your chin, it's going to really teach you how to be active and tight when doing the squat. And it's good for all fitness levels, whether you're a beginner, intermediate, or advanced. It's a good way to learn how to squat and to work a lot more muscles. I think a lot of people, like I said, associate the barbell squat as like the king of squats, but I think its utility is probably best suited for people who are training specifically for powerlifting. So unless your main goal is to get stronger, I think there are other ways to squat and do so effectively. So the goblet squat, like I said, it's super easy to do. Anyone can do it. You can progress doing it, and you get more bang for your buck. Yes, you're not going to be able to overload it as much as a barbell squat, but it's much easier to do, and it's probably safer as well. The second one I chose, this one was more for personal preference, and that's the heel elevated squat. So I say personally because I probably have the opposite problem as most people do. So I'm hamstring and quad and glute dominant, whereas I want to build my quads. But if I try to do a regular squat, whether it's a goblet squat or a barbell squat, naturally I'm going to push my hips back and my glutes are going to take over, my hamstrings are going to take over. And even though I'm trying to build my quads, I'm just perpetuating that imbalance that I already have. So I want to try to find a way that I can overload the quads. So this would only be if you are looking to build the quads and you know maybe that your typical squat struggles to hit those quads, or if you maybe don't have enough depth. And then what you can do is you can actually elevate those heels, which allows your knees to flex a lot more and allows you to get down a lot lower into the squat. So for me personally, when I do the heel elevated squat, I can feel my quads a lot more. I'm not putting the same amount of hip flexion. I'm not sitting back into the squat as much. So it's just a manipulation of a squat in order to work a different muscle group for me. It also helps if you have really tight hips, so Rich can probably get more into this, like hip impingement and stuff like that, where you can only push your hips back certain distance, or if you just struggle with ankle mobility, like I do as well, or calf mobility, and you're just really tight and can't get down low enough. So I don't think the heel elevated squat is for everyone, but I think if you're one of those people that struggles with either mobility with a squat, or you're just naturally glute dominant and you want to build up those quads, I think the heel elevated squat is a great option. And the good thing with the heel elevated squat is you can use different equipment. You can do it in a goblet position, you can do it in a barbell, back squat. There's so many different ways you can do it. It's just a way of shifting that natural setup for you.
Yeah, so I kind of have one of my exercises kind of combined here too. So my 2 exercises for the squat. Second one I'm a little sketchy about. I was kind of torn up. The first one is actually heel elevated goblet squat, so kind of combining your 2 into the 1, maybe a little bit of cheating there. The second one is actually the barbell squat, and I'll kind of get into that and really break it down. But the first one, again, I'm not going to go too much in depth because I don't want to repeat the same point Sean did, but it's just a great way to kind of build the quads. And if you have tight ankles, it can be just a good way to kind of get down deeper into a squat, which could therefore translate more into knee flexion, which is kind of the bend at the knee more, opposed to hip flexion, where you're kind of sitting back. And if we kind of run it over our ankles, our body kind of wants to bend forward. And again, if we're just elevated, you can kind of get down nice and low in that position. So that's why I love it in terms of the heel wedge, or the heel elevate, I should say. And again, yeah, just great core control. I don't want to go into too much depth. Sean said some great points there, so we'll kind of keep it at that. The heel over the squat is definitely a fantastic way. If there is one negative, again, just in terms of overload, generally speaking, people's core shoulders are going to give out before their legs kind of give out. So if you're trying to build your legs, then it could be a potential disadvantage. The second one, I'm being a little bit hypocritical here. I put the barbell squat in, and The reason why I say I'm being hypocritical is I don't barbell squat myself, and I don't do it with my clients unless they have the prerequisite mobility and stability. Let's talk about some of the advantages first of the barbell squat. Again, it all comes down to overload for me. So we're trying to kind of build our strength and muscle growth. The barbell squat, it is by far the best squat movement you can overload in. So again, goblet squat, a lot of people, if you do 100 pounds, is pretty impressive. For a lot of people, barbell squat, you can add on plates on top of plates and really kind of grow your quads and your glutes by really overloading that movement. So that's by far the number one reason why it picks the barbell squat, is in terms of it's the best for strength and it's the best in terms of muscle growth. Now the downside to it, very complex movement to master. You need mobile ankles, you need mobile hips, and you need a mobile thoracic spine, so your mid-back. If you're lacking mobility there or even stability in your hips or the ankles, your body, as I said, the movement is going to start breaking down. Whether it's a knee cave, or your chest starts to drop down, or you get a hip shift side to side. So it is a very complex movement to master, and I only do this specifically for clients I know that can squat comfortably. So if you can't master a bodyweight squat, you have absolutely no business going under the barbell. So I really say this with fair warning. If you have great mobility, great stability, barbell squat away. If you don't, I would say take extreme caution towards that movement. Anything to add at all in terms of maybe why you pick the barbell squat, or a side note, say anything at all in terms of the squat pattern before we move on?
Well, just for the barbell squat, like, for me personally, unless your main goal is to get stronger, there's no need to barbell squat heavy. With that being said, I like the barbell squat when it comes to maybe lighter loads if you're able to do it. So, especially if you're trying to squat as heavy as you can, overload like you said, you don't want your grip to be your limiting factor. You don't want your chest and your hands. What you can do is just throw on that barbell on your back, and you are, I wouldn't say isolating the legs, but you're putting the majority of the tension on the legs. Your upper body isn't working quite as much as it would during a goblet squat or even a suitcase squat. So if you have the shoulder mobility and you don't mind throwing that barbell on your squat, you're able to do it on your back, and you're able to do it with good form. You don't always have to barbell squat heavy. So I do a combination of what you were saying before. I do the heel elevated but not goblet. I actually do the barbell squat, but I don't go anywhere near my max. I'm not trying to get stronger. I'm trying to build my quads. So there's definitely a way to do it, but it really depends on the client. Unless they are specifically trying to get stronger, I don't see the point for most people to go super heavy barbell squat. I just don't think the risk is worth the reward.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And when I mean like strength, I'm kind of talking like, maybe the 6 to 12 rep range. Like, I agree with that. Like, when people try to get like 1 RMs or 3 RMs, like, I think it's very necessary to your point, unless you have like a specific goal you're trying to address. We got pull first. I guess it's my turn to start off, right?
Let's do it, yeah. All
right, so the next pull, the pull pattern, the 2 exercises I picked, these are pretty straightforward. You might even have the same or at least close. I have the chin up and I have the T-Rex row. So my rule of thought there is I picked 1 vertical pulling motion and 1 horizontal pulling motion. So let's start with the chin up first. Chin up is one of the king of upper body, if not even like full body exercises you can do. Great way to get the lats involved, great way for core stability, great for the biceps, and even muscles that we don't really kind of think about, like the lower traps and a muscle called the serratus anterior. That's very important in terms of shoulder stability. The chin up is going to hit all of those. And once again, my big emphasis in terms of picking exercises is, can you overload the movements, and does it hit a lot of muscles? And the chin up hits a ton of muscles. You can overload the movements, so it's good for strength. At the same time, it is good for muscle growth. It has a great anabolic effect because we are hitting a lot of muscles in that compound movement. So I do love the chin up. If there is a limiting factor, I'd say, or a couple limiting factors, it definitely would be a complex movement. If people have bad core stability, you'll see a lot of lower back arching going on. And if people don't have full overhead mobility or close to overhead mobility, or even symmetrical, even more important, we can kind of get some shoulder issues. So I see it all the time. Someone on the right side can go up all the way, no problem. On the left side, they're 10 degrees shorter. Think what happens when you're at the top, or actually the bottom of a chin up. You're kind of shifted towards the side. That can cause a lot of unnecessary strains to that one side of the shoulder. So that's kind of one or a couple of downsides of the chin ups. But in terms of strength, even some stability and muscle growth, fantastic exercise to do. The second one I picked is the T-Rex row. And again, T-Rex row, it's a horizontal moving pattern, and it's easy to overload once again. If we want to make it tougher, we put our feet farther away. We can add plates on top of our body. So it kind of gets more the mid-back muscles along with the lats, opposed to just the lats like where a chin-up would get. That's where the kind of the horizontal versus the vertical comes down. And the reason, or so the number one benefit I find the T-Rex row as well, it's super spine friendly. So we're not leaned over, we're not grabbing a barbell, we're not grabbing dumbbells. We have the T-Rex as a machine, and we can still overload it so easy and so properly. So that's the reason why I really enjoy the T-Rex row. Again, in terms of limitations of the movement, there really aren't that much. Maybe a little bit of core control. If you start to get really heavy and you're pulling, you can build a little lower back arching and kind of that rib flare. But besides that, the T-Rex row kind of checks off all the boxes for me. What did you pick in terms of your 2 pull exercises?
Yeah, we had the same thought process. So for me personally, I said chin-ups or pull-ups. I think they're both interchangeable.
Yeah.
And incline chest-supported dumbbell row, which is very similar to the TRX row.
Yeah.
The reason I chose chin-ups and pull-ups, very similar to you. But I think even just from like a physique point of view, find anyone who can do a lot of chin-ups and look at their physique. They're going to be in unbelievable shape.
Yeah.
The downsides is it takes a lot of body weight strength to be able to do chin-ups. So it's not one of those exercises that anyone can step in the gym and just like start to bang out a bunch of chin-ups. Like you do have to have a certain level of fitness to even get to the point where you're able to do one. So it's not the most beginner-friendly exercise in the world. And it does help if you have lower body fat percentage too. So, which is why it goes so hand in hand with physique, because it's a combination of having really good body weight strength and relatively low body fat percentage. And if you have those, you could do no other exercises for your upper body and have an unbelievably impressive upper body physique. So the chin-up's probably my favorite exercise for the upper body, just because it's so, it works so many different muscles and you don't need any equipment, you just need a bar. You can do pull-ups, get the same type of benefits. So chin-ups, pull-ups would be my, my number one, the negative being the level of degree of difficulty it would be for people to step in. It's not just like one of those exercises that you can do off the bat. The second one, exact same idea as the TRX row. I chose the incline chest supported dumbbell row, which is another spine friendly exercise. Like Rich said, there's nothing wrong with doing hip hinge, barbell rows, hip hinge, dumbbell rows, but there is that additional stress on your low back. And unless you're able to hip hinge correctly and engage your core while doing it, a lot of people, especially if you're not at that high level of fitness where you can get that proprioception engaged, then I think there's just more appropriate exercises. I think the TRX row would be one option. The reason I didn't choose the TRX row is just because if you're working out from home, chances of you having a TRX are probably lower. I also think there are a couple additional technique points that you need to consider with the TRX row that you probably don't need to consider with the chest supported row. So for those of you who don't know what the chest supported row is, you get a bench, you set up on the incline, you lay down on that bench, you grab your dumbbells and you pull. It's super versatile as well. So you can do a neutral grip with the elbows in if you're looking to target the lats more. You can angle the grip, flare out a little bit more for the rhomboids. You can do more of a high row for the rear delts, for the upper back. It's just super versatile. I will say the one negative for this is it's not as comfortable for a lot of women for obvious reasons. But it's a relatively easy exercise to do. If you do have a bench and a pair of dumbbells, it's one of my favorite exercises to do for the entire back.
Yeah, I really got nothing to disagree with that. For me, it kind of came down to TRX row, chest supported row. To me, they're 1A, 1B. So honestly, I really have no negatives at all in terms of the chest supported row. It's kind of right in line with that TRX row. So we'll move on to push now. We've got a couple more to go. I'm interested to hear yours for push. You're the master at shoulders, kind of chest. You got some pretty good strength there. So what are your top 2 exercises in terms of pushing movements?
So the 2 that I chose are probably not the 2 that I'm best at, but that are better for the average person, I guess. And the first one I chose is the landmine press. The second one I chose is the humble push-up. So the landmine press I chose because Rich, I'm guessing you probably chose this one?
Believe it or not, I didn't.
No? Okay.
It was my third. It was my third.
So Rich could probably go in a lot more detail here, but the overhead pressing that most people do, it's not suited for everyone. If you don't have the mobility, if you don't have the core strength, overhead pressing, while great exercise, is often a risky exercise. So the landmine press allows you to get the same type of benefits from overhead pressing, but it's a lot easier on the shoulders. And you get a lot more activation from the chest as well. And personally, one of the things that selfishly I included this one with is because I'm one of the few people who have more of what we call like a military posture. Whereas in general, I know Rich disagrees with this, but I like the concept of pull more than you push. I think for the average person, that's really good advice. Most people are really slumped forward with their shoulders forward. I've been hearing that advice for so long that I overcompensated. And I just ended up doing a ton of pulling. And what ends up happening is my shoulder blades are really close together. I'm super rhomboid dominant. And it looks like it's super impressive posture, but it's actually not good for your shoulders. So the landmine press is a perfect exercise to actually get that shoulder blade up and push forward to engage those serratus muscles, which is like the rib-like muscles, they call it the boxer muscle, that allows you to push and press for the shoulders and chest with a much lower risk of hurting your shoulders. A lot of lifters have really bad shoulders. This is a much more shoulder-friendly exercise that also works the chest. And for someone like me who's really protracted all the time, it allows, or sorry, retracted all the time, it allows me to get into that protraction, upward rotation, and helps improve my posture into more of a neutral position. The downside, obviously, is not everyone has a landmine setup, so it's not very, the utility is not great for that, but if you have a barbell, you can put it in a corner of your house as long as you have some towels to wrap it up. So landmine press, I just think it's very versatile. If you do have access to it, it's good for the core, good for chest, shoulders, serratus, and much safer than a traditional overhead press. Second one I chose is the push-up. The push-up, the main reason I chose it is because something that anyone can do. Anytime you can get a body weight exercise that's as effective or more effective than using heavy weights, take a lot of pressure off your joints and your nervous system, that's a great exercise to choose. So the push-up is fantastic for that reason. It's scalable, so you're able to regress it and do easier variations. You're able to progress it and overload it with weight. So if you're able to do push-ups relatively easy, you can put some weight on your back, and it's just a very versatile exercise. The problem with the push-up is because it's such a common exercise, everyone just assumes that they should be able to do it. But the push-up is actually a really difficult exercise, and it's a full body movement. So we usually have two types of clients. We have half the people that want to take it easy because they're not comfortable with really pushing to that next level, and they tend to go maybe half a step lower than where they should be. And then we have the other half who are super ambitious, maybe trying to do things that they aren't necessarily ready for. And the push-up is definitely one of those exercises because we often think that those who can't do push-ups aren't able to do it because of technique, but the push-up actually requires a lot of upper body strength. So I think a lot of people try to do the push-up on your toes when in reality they just don't have the body weight strength to be able to do it. So I like the push-up because one, you don't need equipment. Two, you can really overload it. Great for physique, great for strength. Also works your core, your quads, and your glutes if you're doing it properly as well. But like the deadlift, like the barbell squat, I think it really helps if you have a coach to be able to assess your form and make sure you're doing it properly. So it's one of those exercises that looks easy, but there's a lot to it. So what are the two push exercises that you had?
Sure, no, I actually agree with you, by the way, too, in terms of pull push. I do actually like pulling more than pushing for the most part. My kind of thing is like assess, don't assume, kind of like Brown line, because some people will be like you were kind of bunched up, and some people kind of like that, but yeah, as a general rule of thumb, you do a more pulling for sure. But my two pushes, so it's funny, I know that seems like an exercise I picked to land my press, and it's kind of my third one. But I picked the push-up as number one, and I picked the incline dumbbell press as number two. And you said a lot of fantastic points in the push-up, so I'm not going to go too much in depth, but like Sean said, it's a bodyweight movement that I think everyone should do before you kind of get into throwing a barbell. I like it as well because it offers more joint stability. So we have something called closed chain versus open chain exercises. The push-up is a closed chain, meaning your hands are fixed to the ground as you kind of move the body back and forth. Most pushing exercises are open chain. So think like a bench press, the hands are going away. An incline press is the one I have next, and a landmine press. So a lot of those are pushing away open chain movements. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with them. But closed chain, especially if you're hypermobile and you got a lot of mobility, which a lot of people actually do, if you can offer more stability to the joint by having that hand kind of fixed to the ground, this can be a fantastic way to kind of really improve your shoulder and even your elbow and wrist health. So that's a great reason, good to overload, great for core stability. It's a full body kinetic chain movement. Like Sean said, the downside is it can get pretty sloppy in terms of form. If you have no experience in a push-up and you're trying to get ambitious, I don't know how many times I see people hurt their shoulders doing them by flaring the elbows out or hands in front of the body, you set to the side. So it can definitely erect the shoulders and even lower back if you don't have good core control and you're constantly arching the lower back when you're kind of going down and up. So you said a lot of fantastic points, so I'm not gonna really build that too much, but the push-up for me is number one. Number two, I definitely like the landmine press. The reason why I picked the incline dumbbell press, again, a bit more of a meathead answer. And I'm picking because you can overload it a bit more in terms of chest and shoulders, and we can do something called adduction for the chest. So if we want to kind of get the chest involved and really shorten these fibers, we got to bring the arm towards the midline and even cross the body just like that. So if I had to pick two, the push-up, the problem for that for me is the hands are fixed. Great exercise, but we're not getting that adduction component to it. The hands obviously can't go towards midline. A landmine press, again, great exercise, like you said, great for serratus, great for wrapping the shoulder blades around, and if someone has shoulder pain, that will probably be my go-to exercise, depending on the situation, of course. But again, it doesn't really offer that adduction too much, as the line of pulls is kind of straight up, straight down. With the incline press, we can really overload the chest and shoulders. We can bring it across the body. Obviously, there's not too much resistance at that top range, but still a little bit. And it's just a good overall motion that kind of gets those top part of the chest fibers with the shoulders involved, as it lines up very well with those fibers. Any disagreements, anything you want to add to that before we kind of move on to the carry?
No disagreements, but I will add two things. Number one, just to emphasize how complex the push-up really is. Last week, I was doing a boot camp class. Rich was the one instructing it, and I was doing push-ups, and as I got tired, my push-ups I thought looked great. He comes up to me, he's like, dude, your hips are dropping a little bit. So if it can happen to me, if it can happen to us, it really does help to make sure that you're really focusing on that technique, because it's so easy to just lose track of even one small thing. And just imagine doing that over and over and over and over again. One, your technique's not going to be good, and two, your chances of actually getting injured are going to be way higher. And the second thing I want to add is I agree 100% with the incline press. Personally, it's my favorite pressing movement. I think if you already have a good foundational element of strength, like if you're able to do the push-ups and you're training specifically for bodybuilding, or just like trying to get more muscle and more of an improved physique, if you were to ask me to choose only one chest/push exercise, that would be the one that I would choose. So if you're like, hey, I want to get a more impressive chest and shoulders, give me one exercise, it would be the incline dumbbell press. So I agree with him 100% there.
Awesome, perfect. Let's move on to our last one, and then we'll kind of wrap up today. Is my turn to start or yours?
You're up.
Mine, okay. Next we're gonna do is carry. So carry, what is carrying? It's kind of very straightforward, kind of picking up whatever dumbbell, barbell, trap bar, kind of move it in directions. The two exercises I choose were the suitcase carry and the goblet carry. So maybe a bit of a curveball there. The suitcase carry, the reason why I picked this, it is just fantastic for core and hip control and stability. So we have the dumbbell on the one side. So if you're not familiar with suitcase carry, just a one dumbbell carry basically. And what that does, it really targets the stance leg glute medius, so the stance leg glute, and the opposite with a muscle called the QL. And basically that's something called like the lateral subsystem, and its job is to really stabilize the hips and making sure we don't get that hip drop. You may have seen people when they walk, their kind of gait patterns would kind of dip towards the side with kind of a side bend. That's something called Trendelenburg gait, and that's a faulty movement pattern. The suitcase carry, if we kind of have that one dumbbell, we're walking, we're really focusing on the cue I like to kind of give is if your hips are a bowl of water, make sure it's not tipped either way. If we really focus on that cue, it's just a great way to train that subsystem, in which I kind of mentioned, and really kind of light up the core and the opposite side QL, which job is to really stabilize the spine and stabilize the hips. So if you're looking to improve your core control and try to minimize back pain, I think the suitcase carry is a great way to start, as it hits a lot of surrounding muscles around the spine and stabilizes that lateral subsystem. The second one I'm going to talk about is the goblet carry. And the goblet carry, if you're not familiar with it, just be one dumbbell in front of the chest and you're just walking back and forth. And my emphasis, as you kind of tell, is a lot of core control when it comes to carries. And the reason why I like the goblet carry is it's an anti-extension. So kind of think of a plank where you're trying to prevent that lower back from arching. It's an anti-extension type of carry where you have it in front of the body and you're trying to make sure that lower back isn't arching. So you really have to light up the front part of the core when you are doing a goblet carry. And if you don't, the dumbbells can be kind of rest in your chest and you're going to arch lower back. And this can be a great transition exercise to something like a deadlift or a squat. When you kind of get into that top position, are you going to keep the core tight and squeeze the glutes, or are you just going to extend the lower back? So mastering the goblet carry and even suitcase carry are I should say, both great transitional exercises to goblet squats, deadlifts, and any sort of single leg training. And that's why I love the exercises. If there is a downfall, if you're looking for pure strength, these exercises probably wouldn't be my first choice. These are just good for more control. What are the 2 carry exercises you choose?
So I actually agree with you 100% with the suitcase carry.
Okay.
It's not my personal favorite. I don't enjoy doing it at all. Personally, I just don't like the way it feels. But like you said, it's such an important exercise. It's one of those movements and areas that we really neglect. And I think the suitcase carry does a really good job of addressing that for all of the reasons you mentioned. So I really don't want to get more in depth there. I think you did a great job of explaining the suitcase carry. So that would be one for sure. The second one, which is probably the most obvious one, is going to be the farmer's carry. So the farmer's carry, it's a fun exercise to do. And it's just a great test of pure raw strength. You can really tell how strong someone is by how well they farmer carry. And if you don't know what a farmer carry is, you just grab 2 weights, usually dumbbells, 2 kettlebells, it can be anything. You grab 2 weights, pick them up, and you walk with them. It's super functional. It's like when you're going back from the grocery store and you're picking up the bags of groceries and you're walking back. It's really, really good for overall strength. And another thing that I really like about the farmer's carry is it really helps your grip. And especially if you're trying to get better with exercises like deadlifts, where the grip is the limiting factor, then doing exercises like farmer walk is going to have really good implications to transition over to exercises like the deadlift. So it's going to really help strengthen your grip. And one of the weird statistics out there is grip strength is actually associated with mortality, meaning people who have stronger grip tend to live longer, which is a strange stat, but grip strength is one of those very simple tests that can just show how strong someone is. So if you're trying to get stronger, the farmer walk is a great exercise. It's really fun to do because there's not too much in terms of technical element to it. You do want to engage your core. You want to try not to move too much side to side. But essentially the fact that you have 2 equal weights makes it a lot easier to do than a regular suitcase carry, for instance, which you'll feel that dumbbell pulling you to one side. And your core's job for that one is to stabilize. Whereas the farmer carry gets that heart rate up. It's a conditioning exercise. It can be a strength exercise. It can be a stamina exercise. And it works so many different muscles. I think for me personally, it's the only carry that I do on a regular basis. And I've just found really, really good transition to other parts of my workouts because of the farmer carry. So that would be the second one that I chose.
Sounds good. So we're kind of similar thinking in terms of grip here, but here would be my somewhat rebuttal to it. I just think if we're doing deadlifts, we're doing rows, we're doing chin-ups, we're holding dumbbells, I think a lot of people actually overuse their grip. And don't get me wrong, if you're not doing those exercises like that frequently, you're not overloading, and you're a relatively beginner and trying to build your grip strength, I would absolutely say go farmer's carry. But sometimes we actually overuse our grip. It can actually kind of lead to, maybe a tendinopathy in your elbow, maybe, wherever maybe it is, a tennis elbow or a golfer's elbow. But you're absolutely right. It's so important for grip strength, functional strength. Like you said, is a great example in terms of actually carrying the groceries. The only concern I have sometimes is you've got to monitor how much gripping you're doing during your overall week. If it's relatively low and you're doing a lot of stuff on your back and maybe you're using like straps, then I would say absolutely go for farmer's carry. But if you're doing a lot of like deadlifting, pulling, I would say you definitely gotta be maybe a little careful how much you do the farmer's carry because it could lead to like an overuse injury. But that was my third choice, farmer's carry. I just kind of figured like a lot of gripping involved, so maybe not necessary, but you make so many good points in terms of like why you need the grip strength, and if you don't have enough grip strength, this would be probably my number 1 choice. So anything else you want to say to anything about that or extra point at all?
I guess just like not necessarily a rebuttal, but like Rich said earlier, context is everything, and you could definitely make an argument for grip strength either way. So the way Rich trains, like he absolutely crushes his grip, right? Like so when he does a Bulgarian split squat, for instance, he'll use like 2 really heavy dumbbells, which in turn is going to work a lot of his grip. Yeah. When I do a Bulgarian split squat, I'm throwing a barbell on my back. I want to work my legs. I don't want to work anything else. I think for the average person, they are probably weaker in the grip than they probably should be, which is why I think it's super important to train the grip. So to Rich's point, he's 100% correct, especially if you train the way he does with heavy dumbbells for everything, a lot of pulling, a lot of heavy deadlifts, then yeah, you can definitely overdo it with the grip. I just think most people probably don't train that way. I think most people probably find that during a lot of exercises, it's actually their grip that's preventing them from maybe doing as heavy as they want to get. So you kind of have to look at where you're at, how you train, and it's not as easy to just generalize one way or another. So I think context really matters for that one.
Yep, I agree 100%. Context for sure. Like I said, how I train versus someone else trains is definitely a lot of factors, so I think you're absolutely right there. That wraps up basically our 2 exercises for each movement. Anything you want to add to it before we kind of wrap the video up here and the podcast up?
No, I'm curious what your 2 most difficult ones to choose for. Because for me personally, it was the squat. I'm like, how many different squats could there possibly be?
Yeah.
And carries, just because I can probably list 5 or 6 really good carry variations, but realistically, I only do one regularly, and then the suitcase carry kind of occasionally. So those were like the 2 ones that I had a tough time. I could personally like name 5 or 6 push and pulls easily. So like, what were the 2 hardest ones for you at least?
Squat for sure. I was going back and forth with squat because like I said, I really don't do barbell squats. I generally don't do them with my clients, but it's like, it's one of the things, like I understand the benefits of them. So if you can, you know, if you have the mobility and stability to squat deep with the barbell and you have no imbalances, it should be an exercise you should do, but it's very contradicting. So I was like, oh, do I put that in? But at the end of the day, if you have no prerequisites, I think it was a great exercise. And the second one for me, believe it or not, was actually push. Because, like you said, the landmine press, you know me, I'm kind of like a corrective guy. I kind of think about shoulder health. So I'm like, do I put the landmine press in? Do I put the incline press in? Do I do an up and under cable? It's kind of like more of like a bodybuilding move to kind of get the top part of the chest. I was thinking closed chain, the kind of hands toward the ground versus open chain. So I really tried to balance it out, and ultimately I came down to 1 closed chain movement with your hands fixed, which is a good overall full body, and then 1 more specifically targeted for the top part of the chest and shoulders. That is an open chain movement, which is the incline press. What about you? What was your, you said squat? Anything else for that? Or?
Squat and carries for me. Just
squat and carries,
because I just don't do the carries that often. But either way, I think for most of you, anyone, if you look at any of the exercises we listed, you can't go wrong. They're all really, really good exercises that give you bang for your buck. It's not like it just does one thing that kind of helps. It's going to help you get stronger. It's probably going to help your physique. It's going to help most of them with your imbalances and correctiveness as well. So I think you can't go wrong with any of these exercises. Even the ones that we disagree on, even the ones that I wouldn't necessarily choose, I still think are really, really good exercises.
Exactly. And remember too, we're only picking 2. So there's like, we do basically all these exercises. We had to pick 2, and it was really hard to kind of really differentiate between maybe the 2nd and 3rd one or 2nd and 4th one. So they're all great exercises in which we listed here. But thanks for doing the podcast. That was fun today. Hope you enjoyed it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. And I hope you guys enjoyed it. Remember, Breakthrough Bootcamp, we're kind of getting underway here. Come on in, check us out. Morning class are getting super busy, so come on in, experience it, get to try a class, and we'll get you set up for your first class here. Thanks so much, guys. Hope you enjoyed the podcast. Until next time.